before the first human footsteps ever touched the burning sands of the Arabian Peninsula, before recorded history captured the upheavals of Mecca, where the cries of the weak and the call of the divine blended into the night, there was already a story waiting to be told. A story buried under a layer of dust so thick that it seemed no one would ever be able to lift it again. Yet once the truth appeared, it would leave the entire world in stunned silence. Because right in the heart of that land once drowned in chaos, a child was about to be born. A child that, if humanity had known in advance what was coming, they would have fallen to their knees in awe. And that story, my friends, is the story of Muhammad, the final messenger of Allah. Welcome to Prophetic History Explained. Get yourself ready, because the journey you are about to begin is not just history. It is a key that unlocks secrets the world has long forgotten. If this is your first time visiting the channel, make sure you subscribe so you do not miss any important moment in the videos to come. That year, the Arabs called it the Year of the Elephant, a moment in time when human arrogance was shattered by an unseen power. Abraha, with his massive army and his ambition to burn the Kaaba to the ground, seemed destined to make all of Mecca tremble. But in an instant, flocks of small birds descended from the sky and brought destruction upon his army in a way no sword or spear could ever achieve. That story spread across the entire peninsula like a warning. And in that very year, marked forever by a miracle, a child was born. A child whose very existence was a far greater miracle than the storm that rained down upon the army of Abraha. That child did not even have the chance to see his father's face. Abdullah passed away before his son could open his eyes to this world. The young mother, Amina, held her baby to her chest with every ounce of love her heart could give. But what awaited that child was not a life wrapped in human protection, but a path of trials written by the decree of the Most High. When he had just passed the age of 6, Muhammad faced a second deep loss when his mother died on the journey home from Yathrib. No child in Mecca carried a loneliness as heavy as his, and no one knew that this very loneliness would become the fertile soil in which a magnificent heart would be forged. After his mother's death, Muhammad was taken in and raised by his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, the highly respected chief of Banu Hashim. His grandfather loved him with a special tenderness, to the point that when he sat with the elders in council, he would always keep the boy close by his side, as if he could sense the greatness hidden in the future of this small grandson. But only 2 years later, death came knocking once more, and Muhammad was left with yet another emptiness that could never be filled. By the age of 8, he had already said farewell to everyone dearest to him. Yet right in the middle of that rootless, fragile time, the first light of Muhammad's character began to shine. Abu Talib, his uncle, a man poor in wealth but rich in compassion, took him in. Unlike the Meccan children who grew up in comfort, Muhammad was raised in simplicity. He learned to work, to observe, to listen, and to empathize. He accompanied trade caravans to distant lands, watching people buy and sell, argue and fight. Deep inside, he felt clearly that something essential was missing in the world, something that did not lie in money or power, but in the human heart. The desert became Muhammad's first school. In the whistle of the wind across the dunes, he learned patience. In the nights that seemed to stretch endlessly, he learned stillness. In each sunrise, when the first light tore apart the darkness, he learned that the greatest beginnings often come after the longest stretches of night. Every loss, every collapse did not make him weaker. It shaped him, like a piece of metal heated in fire and cooled in cold water, becoming firm, sharp, and full of inner strength. Those who had met Muhammad during his childhood would all say that he never lied, never deliberately harmed anyone, and never abandoned someone who was weak. They did not realize that they were standing before a person whose heart was being carved and refined by pure, unfiltered pain. Pain strong enough to shape a leader who would never be corrupted by power, a teacher who would never be trapped by arrogance, and a human being gentle enough to weep for the entire world. Muhammad's childhood was not the peaceful painting that many people might imagine. It was a sequence of trials arranged with astonishing precision. Each misfortune was like a brick laid down to build the foundation for the greatness he would one day bring to humanity. From those very roots, the journey that would change the entire course of human history began to quietly stir, like a seed waiting beneath the scorching soil of the Arabian desert for the moment to break through and reach the light. If you find this opening chapter compelling and you want to keep exploring the next parts of this story, make sure you subscribe so that Prophetic History Explained has even more motivation to create high-quality videos in the future. When Muhammad entered his youth, Mecca looked like a painting of extremes, where wealth and decay stood side by side. The markets were crowded, the calls of merchants, the clatter of camel hooves on the hot sand blended together with negotiations full of calculation and greed. Yet in this place where words were often broken by self-interest and desire, one young man stood out like a bright piece of metal in a heap of chaos. People saw in Muhammad such integrity that no one could find any ground to doubt him, and such quiet reserve that they trusted him even before he spoke. Because of that character, they gave him a title that spoke for itself: Al-Amin, the trustworthy. It was a title given to him by friends, by strangers, and by those who had watched him grow up. Muhammad was not wealthy and did not hold any formal position of power, but he carried inside himself a firmness of principle that Mecca had never seen before. When others fought over every last coin of profit, he put trustworthiness above all else. When others cleverly hid the truth to gain an advantage, he spoke plainly, even if that honesty meant loss for himself. That unusual honesty made many people come to him whenever disputes arose, as if he were the final safe place where they could place their trust without fear of betrayal. One of the events that made the people of Mecca respect Muhammad even more was the time when the Kaaba was rebuilt. When the clans began arguing fiercely over who would have the honor of placing the black stone back into its sacred position, tension rose so high that the smallest spark could have led to bloodshed. Muhammad, at that time still a young man, proposed a solution that left everyone speechless. He spread out a large cloth, placed the black stone in the center, and invited a representative from each clan to hold a corner of the cloth and lift together. Then he did something very simple. With his own hands, he placed the stone into its proper place. That moment did more than end a dangerous conflict. It exposed three things all at once: his wisdom, his calm spirit, and the reality that fairness can create peace even in places where reconciliation seems impossible. It was that very reputation that led Muhammad to his fateful meeting with Khadijah. She was a woman of noble character, one of the wealthiest and most respected merchants in Mecca. Although she was a woman, she commanded the respect of even the most seasoned traders because of her skill in managing her business and her keen insight into people. When she heard about Muhammad's character, she realized that this was not an ordinary man. She invited him to lead one of her trade caravans to Syria, a task that was never given to someone weak, incompetent, or untrustworthy. On that journey, Muhammad not only protected Khadijah's wealth as if it were his own, but also treated everyone who traveled with him with such kindness that they could not stop talking about him. They said that he never raised his voice, never cheated, and never allowed himself to become careless with his responsibilities. They said that he negotiated with clarity, bargained with respect, and that his sincerity itself brought profits far beyond Khadijah's expectations. When they returned, Khadijah saw not only the goods that had been sold at excellent prices, but something far more valuable. She saw the character of the man who would change her life. She quietly observed Muhammad. She watched his humility when he was praised. She watched the way he never bragged, the way his passionate heart stayed hidden behind his calm demeanor. And she knew that what Allah had placed inside this man went far beyond anything the human eye could see. With honesty and courage, Khadijah, despite being a woman who was deeply respected by many, chose to be the one to send the proposal of marriage. When that offer reached Muhammad, he did not feel pride. He only felt small in front of a woman with such intelligence, virtue, and compassion. He consulted Abu Talib, then agreed. Their wedding was not extravagant, but it was full of tranquility, as if heaven had quietly opened a door to earth to send down its blessing. Their marriage was the union of two souls created to lift and support each other. Khadijah believed in Muhammad when the rest of the world had not yet seen anything remarkable in him. She was the place he turned to when his heart felt heavy, the shelter that protected him from his own self-doubt, the gentle presence that soothed the wounds left by his childhood. As for Muhammad, through his sincerity, his kindness, and his deeply respectful love, he allowed Khadijah to truly feel the value of the peace she had been seeking all her life. In that warm little home, under the fiery red evening skies of Mecca, a new chapter of destiny was quietly opening. No one knew that the love, support, and faith of Khadijah would become the guiding lantern for Muhammad when the angel Jibril appeared to him for the very first time in the darkness of the cave of Hira. No one knew that their lives would not only transform their own fate, but also change the direction of all humanity. And it all began with something that seemed so simple: the honesty of a young man and the discerning heart of a woman who saw what others could not see. When the deep purple of Mecca's summer nights covered the city, and silence flowed over the surrounding mountains like a mysterious veil, Muhammad would often withdraw to the cave of Hira. He did not go there to escape life, but because there was an emptiness in the depths of his soul, pushing him to seek an answer. Mecca at that time was not only a center of trade, it was a place where injustice and sin seeped into every corner. Children were abandoned and begged for scraps of food. The weak were trampled, and no one dared to speak. The sacred sanctuary of the Kaaba was covered with hundreds of meaningless idols, and that very worship blinded people to one another's suffering. Muhammad saw it all, but he did not yet know why his heart hurt so much, why this chaos choked him every time night fell. In the cave of Hira, he would sit for hours, sometimes for days. Light slipped through the cracks in the rock and fell across his back as he bowed in contemplation, while the sound of the wind brushing against the stone walls whispered like voices from an unseen world. No one in Mecca pondered as deeply as he did. Muhammad did not seek fame, and he did not seek power. What he longed for was the truth. He wanted to know what path was the straightest path to what is right, and what was the root cause of the moral decay that had infected society so badly. In that restless questioning that seemed to have no end, destiny was preparing to enter his life in a way no one could have imagined. On a night when the crescent moon hung thin and sharp in the sky, Muhammad was deep in thought when the entire space around him suddenly changed. There were no footsteps, no shadow of a person, yet the small cave was suddenly filled with a presence so overwhelming that his heart contracted in fear. A light so intense that nothing could resist it poured into the darkness. Before him stood the angel Jibril, not as a vague figure shaped by human imagination, but as a reality so powerful that it felt as if creation itself had paused. Jibril spoke. "Recite." Just 2 words, but each sound tore through the stillness, like a bolt of lightning. Muhammad trembled and replied that he did not know how to read. But the angel repeated the command a second time, then a third. And then the first verses of the Quran were revealed. Words that would change the destiny of all humankind. Recite, in the name of your Lord who created. Those words felt as if they were being carved into the deepest layer of his soul. Before that moment, Muhammad could feel that the world was out of balance. Now he knew why he had been called into the darkness of Hira. It was to receive the first light of a message that would lead humanity out of spiritual blindness. When Jibril departed, the cave returned to silence. But it was no longer the same silence. Muhammad was no longer the man who had entered that place. He was shaking, chilled to the bone, and almost unable to stand. The revelation echoed violently through his mind, so powerful that it filled him with a sacred fear. He left the cave immediately and hurried down the mountainside. His heart pounding so hard it felt as if it might burst from his chest. In that moment, he knew only one place where he would be safe: the embrace of Khadijah. She saw him trembling, his face pale, and she did not waste time with empty questions. She wrapped him in a heavy cloak and held him close, as if she could pull all his fear into her own heart. When his breathing finally began to calm and he was able to tell her everything, Khadijah did not doubt a single word. She knew his character. She knew the truthfulness in every syllable he spoke. She knew that his heart could never invent such a story. She answered in a firm voice that history has never forgotten. Allah will never disgrace a person like you. You support the poor, you shelter the weak, you keep your promises. A person like you will never be abandoned. Those were the first words that lifted Muhammad's soul when he was standing before the greatest sacred fear of his life. To help him find further reassurance, Khadijah took Muhammad to see Waraka ibn Nawfal, a man deeply knowledgeable about the earlier scriptures. After hearing what had happened, Waraka immediately understood what Muhammad himself was not yet ready to grasp. He told him, in essence, that is the same angel who came to Musa. You have been chosen as a messenger. But Waraka also warned him that this path would not be easy. He reminded him that no prophet who brought the truth to humanity was ever free from opposition. From that day on, the quiet peace of Muhammad's life was gone, replaced by a mission that surpassed human strength. The revelations continued to come, each verse making it clearer that the world desperately needed a light that had long gone out. He began to share what he had received with those closest to him. The first pure hearts to enter Islam seemed to be selected as if by the hand of Allah himself. Khadijah, Ali, who was still young but sharp and bright, Abu Bakr with his sincere devotion, Uthman with his gentle calm, Zubair with his courage. These early believers gathered quietly in the house of Al-Arqam, a modest home that became the cradle of a new faith. There, they learned each verse of Revelation, slowly absorbing the understanding that the world was being called back to the worship of the one and only. None of them knew what awaited them, but they could feel that a new chapter for humanity had begun, not with shouts and weapons, but with sacred words recited softly in a small room by the flicker of oil lamps. From there, Islam began its journey. It was unobtrusive yet powerful, small in number yet impossible to stop, like the first flame that rises in the middle of a night that has gone on far too long. As the first revelations quietly took root in the hearts of those who believed, and as the house of Al-Arqam became a nightly haven where the tiny light of faith was passed from one soul to another, a great question formed in Muhammad's mind. Had the time come for the world to hear this truth? For 3 years, he and the first believers lived in secrecy, like seeds buried under the soil, waiting for the moment to emerge with strength. But light cannot remain hidden forever. The command from Allah came clearly and firmly. Proclaim it openly, rise, and warn them. Muhammad understood that this step would change everything. He would no longer be only a husband, a neighbor, or the nephew of Abu Talib. He would become the man who directly challenged the entire religious and economic system of Mecca, a city whose leaders filled their pockets thanks to the worship of hundreds of idols. But his mission did not allow him to step back, and on a bright morning, he climbed the hill of Safa, the very place where Meccans would stand when they had urgent news for the people. Looking down from above, he saw familiar faces, relatives, neighbors, friends who had grown up with him. He called them by their clans and their family names. His voice carried far, strong but not angry, resolute but not shaken. When they gathered, he began with a simple question. If I told you that an enemy army was massing behind this mountain, ready to attack you, would you believe me? They answered as one. They had never known him to lie, not even once. That answer opened the way for a truth they had never expected to hear. Muhammad announced that he was a messenger sent by Allah, and the first words he brought were words of liberation from spiritual slavery. Worship the one God alone. Leave your idols behind. But not everyone was ready to hear the truth. The one who reacted with the most anger was his own uncle, Abu Lahab. His curse, shouted in front of everyone, was like the first stab of a knife that would be followed by countless more attacks on Muhammad's mission. From that moment on, his path was officially covered with storms. The Quraysh, who had already been anxious about the rumors of a new religion, now realized that this movement had gone far beyond whispered conversations. They began a campaign of psychological warfare and slander. The very people who once called him Al-Amin suddenly labeled him as deluded, as someone possessed, as a mad poet, as a person who was tearing families and tribes apart. But those accusations crashed into emptiness. They could not touch the truth in his words and his character. When slander failed, the Quraysh turned to persecution. The first believers, most of whom were slaves, the poor, and those without tribal protection, became the easiest targets. They were beaten, tortured, and starved in an effort to make them abandon their faith. During those brutal days, the voice of Bilal echoed through the desert like a blade cutting into the consciences of his tormentors as he repeated, Ahad, Ahad, one, one. Just 2 words, but they carried the entire truth that the Quraysh were desperate to deny. His resilience caused many people to secretly begin to question the idols they worshipped. Others were dragged through the streets, left lying under the scorching sun, and had burning hot sand poured over their bodies. Yet although their bodies were battered, their hearts did not waver. What terrified the Quraysh was not military power, because the Muslims were very few. What terrified them was a spiritual strength that could not be broken. Under pressure from every side, Muhammad still moved from group to group, speaking about Allah, about human dignity, and about justice. He did not use flashy language, nor did he threaten or manipulate. He spoke with sincerity and from the depth of a soul that had seen the darkness in society up close. He reminded them that the wealth they clung to was temporary, that power could never replace the truth. Those words quietly stirred the hearts of many listeners. The anger of the Quraysh grew stronger as they watched Islam continue to spread despite their harsh repression. They went to Abu Talib and demanded that he stop his nephew. But although Abu Talib had not embraced Islam, he protected Muhammad with all the honor and loyalty of a tribal chief. He made it clear that he would never surrender his nephew into their hands. His protection prevented the Quraysh from attacking Muhammad directly, but it also deepened their determination to eradicate the new faith at its roots. In those days, Mecca seemed to split into 2 worlds. One was the old world, clinging fearfully to its traditions and power. The other was a new world, fragile but bright, quietly taking shape. Every secret gathering, every new heart that believed, every act of courage from Muhammad and his companions was like a heartbeat pumping life into a faith that was steadily growing. In that tightening tension, the clash between the message of faith and the authority of the Qurayshi leaders entered a new phase. It led to a harsh trial that no one knew would shape the future of Mecca itself. But before the boycott of Banu Hashim began, Mecca had already witnessed something that no power could extinguish. A small community bound tightly together, a faint light that refused to go out, and one man whose resolve had never taken even a single step backward. When the Quraysh finally realized that threats, beatings, and slander would not extinguish a faith that was quietly spreading, they decided to use the cruelest weapon they could imagine: total isolation. Not the isolation of a few individuals, but the isolation of an entire clan, the very people who had protected Muhammad and those who had followed him. It was not simply a political move. It was a slow-motion death sentence designed to strangle hope before it could fully emerge. The clans of Banu Hashim and Banu Abdul Muttalib, whether they had accepted Islam or not, were driven into a narrow valley outside Mecca. From that moment on, they were cut off from trade, from food supplies, from any normal contact with the rest of the city. A parchment recording the terms of the boycott was hung inside the Kaaba to prove that this was a collective decision of the tribal leaders and that no one was allowed to break it. For 3 years, that valley became a place where faith was tested in ways no Meccan had ever imagined. In the first nights in the valley, there was still firelight, still pots of warm water, still the laughter of children. But soon, the laughter disappeared. Children no longer ran and played. They just lay still, their eyes sunken from hunger. The wind that swept past the rocks sounded like a low moan, heavier than the silence in the eyes of mothers watching their children with empty hands, unable to help. The men divided among themselves dry leaves, the rare wild fruits they could find, and every precious drop of water they collected in leather skins. Under the moonlight, Muhammad could hear the hungry cries of children and the silent pleas of those who were too afraid to cry out loud. Those 3 years pushed the endurance of the entire community to its furthest limits. Yet even in that extreme suffering, there were hearts too compassionate to become accomplices to such cruelty. Some people in Mecca, unable to bear the sight of children wasting away, secretly carried food to the valley at night. They stepped carefully, trying not to be noticed by the guards. Bags of grain, dates, and jars of honey were left in the dark like drops of cool water falling onto a parched desert. Some of these people were not Muslims, but they believed in conscience, something the ruthless boycott could not erase. Slowly, the boycott began to crack, but not from the outside. Some of the Qurayshi leaders who had once supported the decision to imprison Banu Hashim began to awaken as they watched consequences beyond anything they had anticipated. They saw children of the valley growing weak, heard the faint cries echoing off the rocky walls, and realized that they had gone too far. Late at night, by the flickering light of lamps, they gathered to discuss how to end the boycott. When they went to the Kaaba, they discovered that the parchment containing the boycott agreement had been almost entirely eaten by insects. Only one phrase remained untouched: "In the name of Allah." There could be no clearer sign that their decision had angered the one they claimed to honor. On the day the boycott was lifted, the people of the valley emerged thin and exhausted, but their eyes were unbroken. They had endured what no other community could have endured, and that hardship had woven their souls together more tightly than ever before. They had not only survived, they had grown in faith. But that release from hardship did not bring the peace Muhammad might have hoped for. Instead, the greatest sorrow of his life descended upon him like a storm. Khadijah, the woman who had lifted his heart whenever fear seized him, who believed in him when the world doubted, who sheltered him when the first revelation left him shaking, passed away. The home that had once been full of her gentle voice and warm laughter now felt as silent as a closed book. Each time Muhammad stepped inside, it felt as if half of his own soul had gone with her. Not even 2 months later, Abu Talib, the uncle who had shielded him with his honor, who had never accepted Islam but had always stood like a wall between him and the spears of Quraysh, also left this world. With his passing, Muhammad lost the last barrier protecting him from the hostility of Mecca. That year became known as the Year of Sorrow, not only because of these painful personal losses, but because it seemed that darkness had completely covered his path. Yet what makes people revere Muhammad is not that his life was easy. It is that he remained standing through the fiercest storms. He did not sink into despair, and he did not retreat. He lifted his gaze toward the night sky, the same sky that had watched over the first moment of revelation in the cave of Hira, and he knew that his path was not defined by grief, but guided by the light of Allah. Out of those losses, a new stage of his mission began. If the 3 years of the boycott had shaped the determination of the believing community, then the Year of Sorrow shaped the heart of their leader. That heart, which seemed to have been worn down by pain, became a flame that would never be extinguished, lighting the way for the great journey that was about to unfold. The journey of leaving Mecca, the journey of hijra. Before that door opened, Muhammad was only beginning to fully understand the true meaning of steadfastness. Sometimes the strongest light does not appear in moments of happiness. It is born in the very deepest darkness. From his story, we learn a lesson that never becomes outdated. True strength is not never falling. True strength is rising again after every loss. Faith does not exist to keep us away from the storm, but to give us the ability to pass through it. Just like Muhammad, may peace and blessings be upon him, each of us has our own valleys of boycott in life. Moments when we are misunderstood, isolated, wounded, and lose what we thought we could never live without. But if we hold firmly to our faith, our moral principles, and our higher ideals, then those pains will not destroy us. They will shape us into the people we are meant to become. The greatest lesson is this: standing firm in the dark is the first step toward receiving the light. Those who endure hardship with patience and faith will always find that a door eventually opens for them. If you want to continue this journey of exploring profound stories, essential life lessons, and refined historical perspectives drawn from reliable sources, join the Prophetic History Explained community so you will not miss any valuable knowledge about the histories of the prophets, the companions, civilizations, and the timeless lessons they leave behind. And do not forget to subscribe to Prophetic History Explained so that you can support us and give us more motivation to bring you even more high-quality videos. See you again in the next episodes.